I'm Dr. Yael Danieli. I'm the founder and director of the International Center for the Study, Prevention, and Treatment of Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma. I am profoundly moved to moderate this webinar with three wonderful daughters of Hibakusha, which means they happen to be daughters of Hiroshima survivors, but the word applies to Nagasaki as well. They would each speak to you not in your usual, in their usual format or mode. They each has accomplished a great deal, and each one has spoken publicly. But today they would speak to you as daughters of survivors. As when you visit our center, you'll see that indeed the focus is on children and descendants of survivors of all massive trauma. It was in 1998 that that I published this international handbook of multi-generational legacies of trauma that includes over 30 populations around the world, including Hibakusha. That would be chapter 8, and you're very welcome to read it, as you would be welcome to learn about the rest of the populations and join the center in some ways and support the center. We need that. But because we lost time, instead of speaking on behalf of the center and myself right now, I will let, I call them the ladies. I call them the ladies. I would ask Kathleen, then Naomi, then Mitchie, who has some technical difficulties, to tell their own story. And then we will elaborate with some further questions. Kathleen Burkinshaw is also a member of the advisory council of the center, and she will be the first speaker. Kathleen, please.
Thank you very much, Yael. I am a Japanese American author. My mother was born in Hiroshima, and my father was born in Vermont in the United States, and he was a white American. My mother was 12 when the atomic bomb was dropped, and I have been speaking about her experiences for the past 11 years to schools and to education conferences around the world. And then in 2016, I was very, very happy and for my mother that her story, well, it's based on her story, The Last Cherry Blossom, was published. And I wrote that so that it started almost a year before the bombing, because I also wanted to give people a glimpse into who the citizens were, who the families were, who were affected by it. And I was very honored when the United Nations chose The Last Cherry Blossom as the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs, an education resource for students and for teachers. And did you want me to go into more, or should I go over to Naomi?
Yes, dear, please.
Please, okay. My mother met my father in 1958. He was serving in the Air Force, and he was at an Air Force base near Tokyo. They ended up getting married in 1959 at the US Embassy in Tokyo. My father's time in the Air Force had ended, and so he took my mother to the United States, and they moved to the state of Rhode Island. And that's where most of his family was at that time. When my mother arrived in 1959, she was surprised at the amount of prejudice that there still was against the Japanese. And so she decided at that point that she would not tell people she was actually from Hiroshima and experienced the atomic bombing. She decided to say she was from Tokyo because that was the last place. That was the place she met my father. Oh, Mitchie!
Thank you so much.
Yes. Yay.
Sorry,
So when she came to the United States, she decided to do that. And she also worked on learning English, and she became a citizen within the first 5 years of being in the United States. When I came along in 1969, my mother had thought at that point she was not going to be able to have children because she had had a couple of miscarriages, and she just gave up on that. So I was a surprise, a nice one, I think, but a surprise. So when she was bringing me up, her decision was to do what she called Americanize. And she didn't have very much Japanese culture in our house at all. I knew she was from Japan. I also thought she was from Tokyo. And she would cook some Japanese dishes, but it was really difficult at that time to find an Asian market where she could purchase a lot of the things that she was missing from Japan. She had hoped that by doing this, and for me to grow up in that kind of a household, that I wouldn't experience any of the prejudice or some of the racial slurs that she endured when she arrived. That was not necessarily the case. I still did. But growing up until the age of 11, I was still thinking she was from Tokyo. We had special pictures that were in the house of her family. And the main one that everybody sees is this one of my mom and her papa. And this was always in a place of honor. And I never really understood why my mother would always bring him a glass of water every morning, fresh water. And then as I got older, I was supposed to do that. And in the summer of my 11th year, my mother had these awful nightmares, and she would wake up screaming in August. And before, she would just say, it's nothing that concerns me. But that particular year, I remembered that the past August, she had the same type of reaction. And she finally did tell me that it was because she was born in Hiroshima, but she lost her family and her home and her friends on August 6th to the atomic bombing. She wouldn't elaborate. She said it was still too painful. And then she said, don't tell anyone. And so we really didn't talk about it much in the house. I only discovered then when I was 11, my mother started to talk to me about why I bring the water up. And that was when I realized, she told me, because of the extreme thirst after the bomb. And she wanted to make sure he had water. So growing up until the age of 11, I would witness certain things the way my mother would react. She had this fear, I think, of abandonment. So she would push people away first if something started to go wrong, because she felt it would be easier to do this. And she spent her teenage years after the bombing she would call it comfortable in her loneliness. And she was just going to be happy being that way, because if she didn't get close to anyone, she wouldn't lose anyone, and she wouldn't be hurt again. So her way of dealing with things, if there was an argument between my parents, is that she would get very, very angry, and he would no longer be in the house. He would have to go someplace else. And she kind of relied on me to be her confidant or someone to talk to be a friend. And so you find out things when you're young that you really don't need to know about why people argue or what other issues there could be. And then sometimes she would then, go into a room and it would be a dark room like her bedroom, and she wouldn't come out for like an entire day or so. And I would take it personally because I thought it was me, because she just didn't know how to explain it to me, because I don't think she always knew why she was doing it either. And it was really very difficult to do. There were also some times when my mother could read English and she could speak English, but she didn't feel confident in it. So if there were things to do, such as to write out checks to pay things, I would do it. If I was out sick from school, I would write the note and then she would sign it. It was always something where I felt like I wanted to take care of. And in August, especially, my father would tell me to, I was the only one that could make her happy. So I had to be very good at it. So that kind of put me into being the people pleaser, of always trying to make sure everybody's happy. Is she happy? Is he happy? And inevitably, when your parents' marriage has difficulties, there's nothing you can do to really fix that as a child. But that's what I kind of took away. And so I guess I didn't really do much with the Japanese part of me until I was much older. If you want, I can stop now so we can move along to others. I hate to take up other people's time. So we have Mitchie Takeuchi, who is here. I just want to welcome you. I'm glad that we were able to help you with the difficulties.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, sorry for the delay.
No, not at all.
What did I miss?
You didn't miss too much. We were so what I think I'll do then is I will let it go to Naomi. Do you want to go? And then Mitchie can go after you.
Sure.
Thank you.
There's things that are similar to my story and things that are really different. And one thing I find interesting about Kathleen's story is her father was a white American who was involved in the military. So I think that, and also that Kathleen grew up, mostly white area. So, those are a stark contrast to my experience. Both my parents are Hibakusha. My mother was 8 at the time. So she was actually in the countryside because a lot of the younger ones, they, put in temples, outside of Hiroshima proper, because, they did think that something could possibly happen in Hiroshima. So but shortly after the bomb fell, so these are my maternal grandparents when they got married. I mean, they obviously didn't look like this all the time. This was a wedding photo, my grandfather and my grandmother, Chiyoko. And my grandfather, he, in Japan, they were conscripting everybody, right? Because they had a lack of they had lack of men to fight. And so my grandfather, even though he had 3 kids and was, I believe in his maybe late 30s or early 40s, he was drafted. He never went overseas. And because of some bureaucratic mix-up, he stayed in Hiroshima, but he was right in the hypocenter. He was in the middle. So of course he was gone. But my grandmother took my mother, Mayumi, out from the temple to look for my grandfather in the rubble. So since my mother was exposed to the radiation, shortly after the bomb had been dropped, she's considered a Hibakusha. My father is really interesting. He is what they call a Kibe Nisei. So this is let's see, this is a photo. This is a photo of him, almost life size. And he was born in a place called Watsonville, California. It's kind of farmland. And then when he was a child, he and his 2 older siblings went to Hiroshima with their parents because there was some family death that forced them to do that. And so my father was an American citizen in Hiroshima, and he was at the train station, which is part of Kathleen's ancestor story too. So he survived, and he was about 16 years old at the time. So I would not be here if it weren't for the bomb, which is really weird because that's what pulled, those kind of circumstances pulled my parents together. So it's a really, I feel so, my story is of confliction, of conflict, contradiction. I wanted to share two quick stories. One story is when, so I knew about the bomb, you know, from a very young age. I had gone to Hiroshima when I was 3, when I was 14, and my grandmother, the grandmother who was in that photo, took me to the Peace Park and explained, you know, she took me to the diorama and said, you know, I was here with your uncle, your grandfather was here, your dad was over here. So I was introduced, I was a witness to a witness. But my one of my cousins said to me, I do not like Americans because you dropped the bomb. So I was shocked because my father was an American, but he was a survivor. So it was like, but my cousin was on my maternal side. He didn't know. So I knew the ironies, and a lot of things don't make sense at the time of war. So that's one thing that stands in my mind. The other story I wanted to tell was my parents belonged to the Committee of Atomic Bomb Survivors. They do medical tests every other year. So we would get these manila envelopes, and then the return address said Committee of Atomic Bomb Survivors. So I put some papers in there for school. And then one of my classmates saw that. And you can't see, but I'm vertically challenged. I'm like 4'10". And one of my classmates, he looked at that and he goes, oh, no wonder you're so short. You know, it's because of you're deformed in some way. And it was like this, I mean, I don't know. It was just such an odd feeling. And I never up to that time had really thought that, you know, I could be, even though my grandmother later told me they were worried about my health, that there could be a connection. So those are a couple stories I wanted to share. And then let's go to Mitchie, and I'll put her bio up.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So great to see you. And
Yes,
so
very good.
we must, thank you. We must be talking about how we found out about our family legacy, right?
Mhm.
In my case, since I grew up in Hiroshima, and I was born like 10 years after the World War II, that meant Hiroshima, Japan, or Japan in all, was still living rather post-war era. The World War II was still very close to our lives. And Hiroshima did have sort of like a small town community mentality. In other words, everybody basically knew who went through the atomic bomb. All the story was, I think, shared among the community. And I'm sure the adults would be talking about it among themselves, but it was really never discussed with the kids like us. I guess I believe that they did not want to upset the little ones. So I don't really remember exactly how I found out. My grandparents and my mother were also the survivors. Somehow nobody talked about it, and yet we knew, and especially since my grandfather had a sort of like a distinct role during the atomic bomb time, because he was the head of the Red Cross Hospital, where a lot of people showed a lot of appreciation to my grandfather. So I always knew we were involved. Now, when it comes to my first encountering of the atomic bomb survival was that when I was little, we had this housekeeper, lovely woman, and she had a very visible keloid burn on her arms. And in the summertime, of course, her arm I think that was the left-hand side, covered with keloid, was exposed. And I remember seeing it, and it looked very peculiar kind of burn. And then every summer, I remember she was saying to us, oh, this keloid really starts to itch more every August somehow. And she would be scratching and scratching and scratching. That's all she said to us. But I really remember that story as something very, almost like tragic. And yet we as children never really asked any questions. We just said, So that was my first exposure to atomic bomb.
Mitchie, when you said, what went through your minds? What questions would you have liked to have asked her that you didn't?
Yes, there was a lot of, kind of a form of silence, not only to her, but also to my own mother. There is a general feeling, atmosphere, whether that's my family or even among my classmates. Somehow, it's better not to ask. I'm really trying to remember why we never discussed. My classmates, whose parents were all mostly survived the atomic bomb, they never said anything either. So there is this general atmosphere. We better not talk about it because that may make our family feel sad. It's a generally understood, quiet agreement, it feels to me.
Quiet
agreement?
Agreement. Oh, we call it tacit agreement. Yes.
Yeah.
The conspiracy of silence. Very interesting.
Can I jump in, Yael?
Of course.
It kind of reminds me of Japanese Americans during World War II, after being released from camp. Like everybody knew that people had been in camp, but they didn't really want to talk too deeply about it, other than maybe the weather was harsh or those kind of things. So that's what you said reminded me of, kind of the tacit agreement.
Thank you. It's not to get overly didactic, but there is a major chapter in the book, and another very important member of the board of the advisory council of the center, Donna Nagata, devoted much of her career to study now 4 generations of Nisai and Sansai. And indeed, soon we will have a webinar with her as well. Perhaps, Naomi, I promised you she'll interview you for your book. But thank you for reminding us of another major group of people who were unjustly traumatized and bore the conspiracy of silence in addition to the trauma. After the trauma. It often happens with most traumas that the conspiracy of silence follows it, and in fact makes the effects, particularly on the second generation, but certainly on the first, but succeeding generation, make the effects more pronounced and more serious and more difficult to discuss and go from there, right?
My mother had told me when she started to talk to me about it when I was in my 30s after being really sick, she would tell me that a lot of, for her, that she didn't talk about is when she went to Tokyo about a year and a half after the bombing, there was a lot of prejudice that if they recognized that she was not from there. And she would originally started to say that she was from Hiroshima. And she said people would literally take a step back from her because they didn't understand how the radiation would go. And so she kind of got used to and tried to change the part of her. Every different part of a country can have an accent. And from Hiroshima, you have a different type of accent than you do in Tokyo. So my mother tried to mimic as much as she could so that no one would talk to her and think, oh, you're not from here. And then I think she said too, you wouldn't talk about it very much when you came to the States, especially because she knew marrying a white person, he was in the service, you know, the Americans did drop the bomb, and she didn't want to run into people saying that to her because she had had it in the past and it was too painful. And she also had said to me that she didn't know how people could understand if they didn't live through it. And she felt that it was really hard to describe something so horrific. And, you know, if you didn't, so she felt that she couldn't really talk about it. And I think that was partly why she didn't talk about it when I was young. But I do remember her saying that. And as far as also after I knew what happened, you know, she also would tell me, don't tell your boyfriends about it, especially when I got serious with the man that I ended up marrying. Maybe you shouldn't tell him because he might be worried that something might be wrong with you or wrong with the baby. And I was so shocked at that. And I said, well, I've already told him there's no, you know, issue with that. But it was very surprising how something like that in the silent just kind of continues for all those reasons of what happens. And, you know, I didn't really think about that until we all started talking about it before. So.
Very important. The fear of transmitting to the children. That was not just part of the stigma. You're talking about the stigma, but also the how it's carried to transmitting it to the children. How did your mother respond when you got sick?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry too.
She was very, very upset. Mm-hmm. She felt responsible.
Yeah.
And because of what I do have with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, it is it's a neurological chronic pain progressive disease, and it affects your sympathetic nervous system, but your immune system. And the doctors did relate my immune system issues that brought this disease on. And I think that is partly also what made her tell me about what she went through. Because she was feeling sorry that she thought she did it to me, which I don't see it that way at all. But when she saw how depressed I was getting from it, because I knew I was going to start to lose the ability to walk without assistance, my hands, and I had to give up my job, and I was so depressed. She was really worried about me. And that's when she decided she was going to talk about what she actually went through, so that I would know to also give me that strength, because she wanted to kill herself, but because she lost everyone within a year, and she didn't, because she was thinking of her papa and wanting to make something of her life to make him proud. And she said that that strength that she had, you know, led her to having me and my daughter, Sarah. And I could use that as well to fight through and find a different way of being me, because I wasn't sure how I was going to be me anymore. And it was a very, if I didn't get sick, maybe she would have never told me these things either. And it brought us so much closer together, and it kind of brought a light onto why some of the things happened in my childhood, and made it a little more clear. And it brought us closer. But I really hated to see the pain in her, you know, when she heard the diagnosis. Okay, next.
The one thing I've learned since we met is whoever you become, and you become every day, is wonderful. And we love you, and we are honored to be with you. I know that Naomi and Mitchie feel similarly. So, and despite the fact that you're sick and that you sometimes need more rest, you find the energy to run us all. So this is, and we welcome it. So,
thank you. Thank you.
Naomi, you were, and Mitch, you were not what did you want to?
Well, I just, like everyone else, whenever I hear Kathleen's story, it's so moving and touching. And I was wondering, Kathleen, if you ever had been examined by the Hiroshima team. I know you're on the East Coast, so it's, I mean, I'm wondering, would you welcome that, or would you not want to be part of that kind of study?
I'm not really sure. My mom didn't want to take part in any of that because she just felt they were just looking at us just to see what it did and not to help us. That was her thoughts there. So I don't really know if I would do that or not. I really never thought about it, I guess, because I didn't try to look at it as because of that. So I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think I would.
At a previous discussion, we talked about the term hibakunise and whether we resonated with that term. I'm okay. Do you consider yourself a hibakunise?
I do.
Yeah, like second generation. And I'm cool with that too.
Can you teach the audience what hibakusha means?
Hibakusha is of course atomic bomb survivor, and hibaku is like the atomic bomb, and then nisei, like ni is two in Japanese. So it's like the second, so that basically the children of the atomic bomb survivors. I was just introduced to that term, I don't know how many years ago. And at first I thought it was weird, but then I have embraced it. Here, like in populations where there's a lot of hibakusha, atomic bomb survivors, like California, they would do every other year. And I worked at a Japanese American newspaper, so we would cover it. So the hibakunise were also eligible to be examined. So I did it one year. And I think I kind of had a cold around that time, but my results came back that my white blood count level was high. And after I saw that, I got totally freaked out. I was going, what, it has to be because I was sick, kind of not 100%. And I didn't want to revisit it. So I understand, Kathleen, your resistance to do that, to be part of something like that. But I guess there is like if you get a certain kind of, and Mitchie, what it's called in Japanese, but if you're certified as an atomic bomb survivor, even if you're in America, you can get some assistance from the Japanese government. And like my father passed away from stomach cancer, and some of his funeral was covered by that fund. So, it's just something you may want to just explore, just for, different kinds of assistance. But Mitchie, what do you think of this term?
It's so interesting because I did grow up in the city where majority of people experience the atomic bomb, and therefore everybody was basically understood we are on the same boat. So I didn't really identify myself as family of hibakusha, particularly because everybody was like that. And then also I didn't really think I am the second generation. It only happened when I came to the United States, when I got involved in nuclear disarmament community, right? It was very interesting because I started to introduce myself. My name is Mitchie Takeuchi, and I'm second generation hibakusha. And since I really don't like to be labeled as anything, really, I really had a hard time accepting it because it only happened outside of Hiroshima, let's say in New York City. Then I realized that even though it feels funny to be labeled, however, when there is a purpose, the fact that I am related to the airborne survival becomes very valuable. That's when I really realized that, okay, I am Hibakusha, and I really need to speak up about what my family went through because a lot of people have not. It's a unique experience. And in order to get rid of horrific weapons, right, mass destruction, I can't even thinking about if I like to be labeled or not. It is an important, valuable label as long as we have this mission. So that's how I started to feel. But I have to say, I really did not like to be introducing myself that way.
And that was the first thing you ever said. I remember. I know that we started 15 minutes late. We now have 7 minutes. I sort of would love to know if the audience wouldn't mind staying an extra 15 minutes. Would you? Naomi, Mitchie, Kathleen?
I can do that.
So are you ready? Do you want us to start with the question and answer period? How do you feel? Or would you regret not saying something that you were planning to say first?
Mitchie, did you have anything, Mitchie? Because you
Yeah, you were.
Sorry.
I think we
Yes,
want
well,
to hear about your film. Like, why did you take? We didn't really talk about
That's true.
what are our differing paths to peace? We didn't really talk about that.
Oh, you're right.
Too much.
Oh,
So
Okay, the different paths to peace. That's right.
Yes.
Because
Go
you put the focus on yourselves, which is just wonderful because people get to know you a bit as real human beings rather than just the creators of a book, of a film, of a. I'm still waiting for your books for our library, Naomi. I definitely.
yeah. So may I say a little bit about the film and why I
Please, but just a little bit so the audience. I know that if the audience is at least as moved as we are, they would want to participate. Go ahead, Mitchie.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, so I just like to share with my little bit of a history about how I got involved in this nuclear disarmament community. Thank you. You are so good. And so I feel, because I grew up in this very silent background, even though my grandfather and my mother survived and so on, but because I came to the United States to study, and I've been here in New York for almost 40 years, I've been so far removed from my background. And I really, 10 years ago, by pure accident, which is actually by destiny, I met this group of people called Hibakusha Stories, where they invited the Hibakusha to New York high school students so that they can share their experience. And that's where I met this woman from Hiroshima survival, Setsuko Thurlow. She is as you probably know her, she survived the atomic bomb, and then she, at the age of 13, and she made that horrific experience. She turned that around, and that became her lifelong conviction that the same horrific experience would never happen again. So she has been working in this all her life, and she's in her 80s right now. So I did meet her throughout the whole program, and it turns out that we went to the same girls' school in Hiroshima. That made me feel really even closer to her. She's my upper class woman. And she started to stay in my apartment whenever she came to New York to speak at the UN and so on. And we were having, breakfast and dinner together and so on. And she actually is the person who said to me, Mitchie, your grandfather must have gone through so much. So why don't you start talking about that, discovering about your family history? So that was the beginning of my involvement. And I was very, very lucky. So meeting her started to change my life and getting more and more involved in the movement and so on. And then my friend Susan and I decided that in order to continue to spread the words of important words to create the peaceful nuclear free world, it will be so important to keep talking to the younger generations. Older people, it's very hard to convince to change their minds, but younger people have so much more sort of like a clean palette, so to speak, right? Canvas. So we decided that we want to create this film based upon this amazing woman who experienced this horrific thing as a teenager and lived the life the way she did. And we thought that her life story would really inspire young people to think about, or first of all, to learn about what really happened in 75 years ago, 6 years ago, right? And then this movie could really open up some new experiences for the young people. Mm-hmm. And they may think about it and they may want to take some action because we believe in the power of film, the storytelling. And actually I came to the United States because I happened to watch one movie called Clute. And that's the movie that showed me the role of psychoanalysis. I didn't know there was such a job in this world. Like even a call girl can go and talk to discuss about her sexual problem or something, right? I was astonished. And that made me want to come to the United States to study psychology. I wanted to become a psychotherapist. But anyway, movie can change the life of people. So that's one of the major reasons why my partner Susan and I decided that we want to make a story about Setsuko-san because she has inspired so many people already, but through the film, it could be more and more people. So that's my background about making the Vow from Hiroshima, which is available in Japan and the US right now.
Yeah, and all four of us have seen it. And it's really an amazing film. And Setsuko Thurlow is a member of the honorary board of the center. And she and I are planning a special webinar interview in the fall on a Sunday. We haven't chosen the Sunday yet. But I hope all of you will come to visit to this amazing woman who I'm very happy to call a friend for very many years, actually. So like many other children of survivors of other catastrophes, such as the Holocaust, you chose you chose a mission which I call reparative, a reparative mission to repair the world for yourselves, for your children, and for generations to come. And I know many people in the audience today share in the same mission. And I would love to have those of you in the audience who still can stay with us until 2:15. So at least we will have the full hour. Please, Naomi, you were going to help me with deciphering the questions and answers.
Yeah.
You can do it with me. So
I,
you see, in the center, we do things collaboratively. So,
I think a lot of the questions have been answered. And there's some things about the professor in Chicago. I'll try to look through my notes and post it, Susan, and I'll respond to your question. But there were just very more specific questions, I think, than general ones so far. So if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A or the chat, either way.
you can also check in the chat if there are comments that you'd want to share.
Oh, one thing that was interesting, there's an academic in Southern California who's Gloria, who
Who's doing the book?
Yeah, she mentioned she's really on top of things with the Hibakusha, and she said unfortunately from 2019 they stopped doing examinations of the Hibakunise. So I, for whatever reason, Gloria Montebruno Saler says, as of 2019, Nisei and Sansei Hibakusha in the USA are not eligible for medical examinations administered by Hiroshima Prefectural Medical Association. I did not know that. And of course,
Gloria, Gloria, would you please be in touch with us directly with the center too? We are very interested, and I know you're working on a book. Thank you. Yes, sure. So I'm sorry you can't. Robbie, can Gloria speak from where she is? Or she can only write?
I think she can only write.
Yeah.
Oh,
too bad. Moment.
That's okay, but we can. We will involve you in the future, I'm sure. But can Robbie? Can you promote Gloria as a panelist?
Yeah, if you would like me to, just give me a minute.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment on my path too.
Yes.
I guess our family personality is I grew up with a lot of laughter, which seems kind of antithetical with what we're talking about, but I think my father's personality, and that's why I was so close to him. He was a survivor and thriver, and no matter what things were in his way, he just found a time to have joy in life. I mean, he was a gambler. I mean, some things are not so good, but you know, he was a gardener. So I think just finding beauty in what he did, although he probably would have liked to have a more high-powered job. But I think, so that got me interested in going, because I write mysteries. So they're more entertainment and they're more an element of surprise. I'm also a former journalist. So I think for me, that's how I want to reach people who may not really have an interest in any of this, but they go, oh, I'll read a mystery with this gardener who solves crimes, which is essentially my Masarai mysteries. And yeah, hello, Gloria.
Hello, Gloria.
So that's kind of the path I've chosen.
Second, let Naomi complete it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's, and I think actually that I got one email. This is really early on when my first mystery, Summer of the Big Bachi, was published in 2004. And a woman from South Yarmouth, Massachusetts said, oh, because I have an older protagonist, he's an old man, he's good, he's kind of a curmudgeon, blah, blah, blah. And then she said, but I really miss him. And then that's what I thought, okay, that could be one of the powers of fiction, is you get into the head of the character. Although, you know, something like Kathleen does, that's very effective too. You know, she gets into the head of her characters as well. But I think with fiction, and then it's a mystery, right? So they enter it in not necessarily seeking to be to to be educated in any sort of way. So I like that element of surprise. So
You weave it in really nicely into the story.
That's all for me.
So you're saying that one of the legacies is not only the substance, but the strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing to learn how complex all these processes are.
And I think for me, when you talk about the multi-generations, and you know, my daughter was so involved in that. And
is she here?
She won't come on. She won't come on.
She's beautiful.
Thank you. She does do her own stuff for New Good Disarmament, but you know, she was in middle school, and that's really where everything started, is because she was upset that there was not much talked about in school, and it was just said that it ended the war, and then there was the picture of the mushroom cloud, and you know, and kids thinking it was a cool picture, not understanding, you know, who is under there. And she was the one that asked my mom if I could talk about it and go into her class, you know, and I think by her doing that really helped for my mother to want to say, you know, she's at that age, the same age I was. So the class is that way. And it really started with me talking to schools before even the book came along. And I just think the multi-generation, you know, there are good pieces to it that continue as well from the trauma that comes. And so I am really grateful for that piece of it as well. And I know my mother was very much so too.
And for, again, just to be didactic for a moment, those of you who visit our website, you can see the Danieli inventory. First of all, we have the most incredible library that aims to accumulate every page that was ever written, every film, every play, everything that was ever done in the area. And we work on it 24 hours a day. And we hope each one of you in the audience as well, check it out. If there's something missing, write me and you'll see it will be in the next day. But in addition to the library, we also have the Danieli inventory for multi-generational legacies of trauma, which is the first scientifically validated instrument to assess multi-generational legacies of trauma. Right now in children off, but it will be adapted onward. And we have it in many languages, including Japanese, for example. And we have in the audience quite a few participants of the general initiative we are doing now to be able to assess children of atomic veterans across the world. So we have another body of scientifically based knowledge to tell the truth and to ensure the truth. So the conspiracy of silence will not run the show as unfortunately it does so much. Gloria, you're welcome. I was so happy to hear about your book. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's a work in progress, and I was just thinking about how long I've been working with the survivors now, and it's been 6 years, and it's been an honor and a privilege. And during my interviews, and I mentioned in one of the comments, I came across one Hibakusha who happened to be in Hiroshima with his brother and his grandparents while the parents were in the camps. And so when I interviewed him, you know, my background is I was born and raised in Italy. I'm Italian. We have no secrets. We talk about everything, you know? And so it was shocking to me to learn that once the children returned from Japan, and they never talked about anything. The parents didn't share their experience in the camp. The children didn't talk about their experience with atomic bomb. And this individual said, there's really nothing to say. They wouldn't say anything. So I learned a lot, and I have to say, Naomi has been my reference several times, asking her about the Japanese American community and, you know, references about cultural issues. And so this book is coming along. And yes, one of the aspects of the book that I take into consideration is the medical examinations. And I interviewed the doctors at the Hiroshima Prefectural Medical Association when they even started, because 2019 was an important year, not only for Nisei Hibakusha not to be part of the medical examination, but also for the Hibakusha who did not have the Techo, you know, the Hibakusha certificate. So up to 2017, the Hiroshima Prefectural Medical Association would cover the cost of the examination for those Hibakusha who hadn't been able to secure a Techo, which some of you know, it's a very lengthy process. And starting 2019, they weren't covered anymore. So the numbers were reduced dramatically. And it was a money issue, as usual. They would say, you know, this is a Japanese taxpayers' money, and we just need to make sure that it goes to the people that they can prove it. So there was some tension during my interviewing these people, and they were not happy about me asking questions. That's for sure. But I've also compiled the data, and I went through all the reports that were put together since 1974 when the first examination took place. And so I was able to compile some interesting charts that looks at the number of the survivors that over time could take advantage of this. But along the way, as I say, and right now, my interest is, you know, as I'm writing this book, I'm looking at what's coming next. I am looking at the legacy of Hibakusha. So I'm interested in the children and the grandchildren and see what's going to come up next. And the difference from 6 years ago when I started working with the Hibakusha is that right now I see their children starting showing an interest in becoming more active from a social point of view, especially when it comes to peace education. And so I had put out an email out there about a month ago, and several people replied to me that they're interested, that they would like to get together, especially here in the United States. So I'm looking at the Japanese Americans, second and third generation Hibakusha, and I have about 50 people that responded. So yeah, so I'm glad to hear about this project, Dr. Danieli, and I'm going to look at your website for sure.
Yeah, please, we can share the riches.
Yeah, and so thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you for, let me just get the information again. You said that since 2019, there is no more medical offerings for Hibakusha Nisei?
Yes. Yeah, second generation, they're not eligible anymore. And I think that was related to the fact that they had conducting a lifelong study through the Radiation Effect Research Foundation as well. And so what the data that they put out was that there were really no major repercussion, medical, genetic repercussion when it came to the survivors. So, and that's a study that it's available on the Radiation Effect Research Foundation website. So there was, although,
would you send me the link, please?
Sure, although in Japan, they still are eligible. Nisei and Sansei Hibakusha are
American. So
yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's.
Oh, can I just say, I'd like to add something.
Please.
With what Gloria said. I just spoke to someone this morning by accident, but that whole like a medical help is different by municipal government. It's not at federal government level. So for example, Tokyo have a very strong lobbying organization to take care of second generation Hibakusha as well. And this is dealing with Tokyo government.
Mhm.
So I believe certain medical examinations for second generation is available if you live in Tokyo or if you deal with Tokyo.
Yeah,
Right.
for Japanese, they say yes, they are still eligible in Japan. Yeah.
What's important when we, as I call it, share the riches, what's important for everyone to know is we pay attention to the psychosocial aspects which have been neglected. What Gloria is speaking about particularly is the medical focus. Okay, and so I don't want the audience to confuse the two. And I know those who don't want to keep the light on the prevention of nuclear war, on the banning of nuclear weapons, etc., don't want to, they'd be perfectly happy if the finding is that there are no effects. But they're talking about really a narrow aspect. And that's not the only reason, but I think there is a political, in everything else, as in everything else in life, there is a political dimension here that we have to remember and not to play into. I think my question person, Naomi,
Yes.
anything else that, only one more question,
Yeah.
and then I want final words from each one of the panelists.
Barbara had asked, and what is next for second and third generations in our mission for nuclear disarmament? I'm carrying on my father's work for peace. He was a young naval doctor who was among the first to treat Nagasaki, victims in Nagasaki.
Yeah, be in touch with us, because that is, we have a very strong initiative across the world now to adapt the Danieli inventory for second generation, for children of atomic veterans.
I know, Barbara.
So please, I'm very glad you asked the question. It is exactly a major initiative, that one of the major initiatives that the center is paying very serious attention to. And there's a great deal of excitement from the atomic bomb survivors and from the atomic veterans organizations to pay attention. And this is not the first time that the psychosocial aspects are paid attention to, but it's an important one. Kathy, yes, thank you. Kathy Sinai, right there, she has a message. She's running me ragged on that one. And I welcome being run ragged by each one of you. I wonder, let's do the opposite. Mitchie, you speak first. Naomi, you're still in the middle. And Kathleen, you'd be the last if you have, final thoughts just for today. I'm sure we'll have another such meeting. Please,
Okay,
Mitchie.
well, thank you. Well, Yael, thank you so much for giving this amazing opportunity. I was so looking forward to having meeting and talking, even though I was really late because of some technical issue. This is so reassuring for me to be able to talk to Kathleen and Naomi, so that we can really exchange and share our experiences and figure out, what that meant was this or that. And I think it's so important, especially second and third generation. We really don't have our parents to rely upon, and we have at least each other. And it's been I was so happy to be able to be there with you, Kathleen and Naomi. And let's continue to have our conversation. And of course, everybody else too. Thank you, Yael.
Thank you for the invitation, Yael. And I think it's good for our worlds to expand from beyond where we live and other communities. I know for me personally, during this time, some writing projects I've been working on. One is regarding more the Pacific Islanders and like Marshall Islands. And I just see so many parallels between what, I mean, it's terrible with the testing and all that, and some of the physical, right? And of course, emotional results from all that damage. And so, yeah, I think my mantle, my personal mantle is Naomi, just like expand further. That's the message I've been getting this year.
Yes, Alan, you're absolutely right. You will sit on us to include everybody. Exactly. Kathleen, please.
Well, Yael, I thank you very much for asking me to be on the advisory council and being able to do this webinar to bring, Mitchie and Naomi were my first thoughts of who I wanted to go with. And I think back to when I first met Mitchie in 2019, and it was at the United Nations. And to see her and to think she's also a second generation Hibakusha. She feels similar things that I do. And I felt such a connection meeting with her for the first time, because it was so nice to be, I'm not alone. I think that was part of my feeling for that. And then as I was reading Naomi's books, and then I was able to get in contact with her and becoming, I feel like Hibakusha sisters, of just being able to support each other and being able to talk. We have some different experiences, but yet we're all brought in with the same the love for our family and wanting to continue their stories so that they don't die with them, that their voices matter, which then we hope when we talk to the younger people, as I do a lot of, is that, my mother's voice matters, the Hibakusha voices matter, and your voice matters too. And it's a way to then bring that, whether it's towards nuclear weapons or whatever we need to stand for, is not to assume that the other person, we don't know them, they're not people. And I think trying to put a face to those people under the clouds that day is so important.
I don't want to have any last words here, because I love being with you guys, as you know. and we continue. Please visit the center. We will have more webinars, and I'm sure you'll come up with ideas. Don't worry for a minute. and we stay in touch.
I love you all. You all mean so much to me.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah, take
Yael,
care, everybody. Yeah, I'm so glad we were able to get it done.
Yes, thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Yeah.
All right.
Bye-bye.